I poured my heart and soul into building my dream home, only for the HOA president to show up with a locksmith claiming she owned it. Her twisted plan: turn it into a community center. The morning air was still cool at 7:15, but a shiver ran down my spine when Bethany Sterling, our HOA president, appeared on my doorstep. Flanked by a locksmith and two board members, she clutched a manila folder so thick it looked like a weapon. Her burgundy power suit, reserved for what she dramatically called enforcement days, seemed to radiate an icy chill, and her smile could have frozen a desert in August. What on earth was happening? "It's time for the property transfer inspection," she declared, her perfectly manicured nails tapping a clipboard. "Our new retroactive building ordinance states that 7 years is the absolute maximum for construction. Your home now falls under community asset protocol." I stood there, still in my work clothes, clutching my unfinished coffee, my mind struggling to grasp her words. "Property transfer? My home? Bethany, I built this house with my own hands," I exclaimed, my voice incredulous. "Every single plank, every nail, every tile, this is my property." She tilted her head, as if I were a particularly dim student. "Actually," she drawled, "Amendment 17B of our updated covenant clearly states that any property under extended construction is subject to HOA acquisition rights. We voted on it just last month at the emergency meeting." The emergency meeting she'd conveniently scheduled for 2 p.m. on a Tuesday when everyone was at work, only attended by 3 of her closest friends from the Wednesday Wine Club. "My name is Ethan Miller, and I'm a structural engineer for a major firm downtown. 7 years ago, I purchased a plot in Pinewood Estates, a quiet community just outside the city. My dream was simple: build my forever home slowly, paying cash, doing most of the work myself on weekends and evenings. It was a therapeutic escape from the corporate grind." The lot had been vacant for years, and the HOA, then led by a kindly retired accountant named Mr. Henderson, seemed thrilled that someone was finally developing it. Mr. Henderson and I would chat over the fence, and he'd even bring me lemonade on sweltering days. Those were the good old days. Everything changed when Bethany took charge 18 months ago. A former retail manager, recently downsized, she had decided the HOA was her new personal empire. Her campaign promise? Skyrocketing property values through ruthless enforcement and creative interpretation of the rules. Creative was definitely an understatement. Bethany treated the HOA bylaws like sacred scripture, with herself as the sole prophet. She started small, measuring grass with an actual ruler, timing how long garbage cans sat at the curb. Annoying, but manageable. But the real nightmare began the moment I finished construction and moved in. First came the violation notices, always on that obnoxious pink paper she insisted made them more visible. "Your mailbox is 3 inches too tall. Your driveway's shine level is unapproved. Your house numbers use a serif font when sans serif is explicitly specified." Each came with a $50 fine. My folder of Bethany's greatest hits grew quickly. By the second month, I had accumulated 37 violations and shelled out nearly $2,000 just for a semblance of peace. Then came the surveillance. I caught her snapping photos of my windows at 6 a.m., claiming she was documenting improper curtain alignment. She measured the angle of my porch light with a protractor, for goodness sake. She even brought a color wheel to compare my front door paint to the approved palette, deeming it one shade too cheerful for the neighborhood's aesthetic. Could you believe the audacity? The situation spiraled further when she started spreading rumors that I was running an illegal construction business from my home simply because I owned tools and occasionally worked on my own deck. She filed complaints with the city, forcing me to take precious time off work to deal with inspectors who would show up, look around, shake their heads at the waste of their time, and then leave. But nothing, absolutely nothing, prepared me for that morning. Bethany stood on my porch with her little enforcement squad, genuinely convinced she could simply seize the house I had poured 7 years of my life and soul into building with my own 2 hands. The locksmith shifted uncomfortably, avoiding eye contact. Even the board members seemed uneasy, but they were clearly too terrified of Bethany to utter a single word. "I demand to see this alleged amendment," I stated, my voice steady despite the fury raging inside my chest. With a theatrical flourish, Bethany pulled a document from her folder. "Right here, Amendment 17B, passed by unanimous vote of all attending members." She jabbed a finger at a section. "Any property under construction for more than 5 years shall be deemed abandoned and subject to HOA recovery for community benefit." "Bethany," I countered, "I was living here while building. I never abandoned anything, and you absolutely cannot retroactively apply rules to existing situations. That's not how laws work." She waved her hand dismissively. "The HOA board has determined that living in an incomplete structure does not constitute occupancy, and retroactive application is perfectly legal under Section 9 of our Emergency Powers Clause." That was it. I pulled out my phone and started recording. "Bethany, are you seriously trying to steal my house right now? Is that what's happening here?" She bristled at the word steal. "It is not theft. It is a legal transfer of improperly managed assets. The community has suffered from your prolonged construction project, and we are simply protecting everyone's property values." I decided to play along for a moment. "And what exactly does the HOA plan to do with my house if this magical transfer actually happens?" Bethany's eyes lit up with a disturbing glint. "We will be converting it into a community center. The main floor will host HOA meetings, the basement will become storage for seasonal decorations, and the upper floor will serve as office space for board members. So basically you want my house for your personal use?" I continued recording, making sure to capture every single incriminating word. "It is for the benefit of all residents," she insisted, though her voice wavered slightly. "We have already applied for several grants, identifying this property as a future community resource center. The paperwork has been filed with the state." That admission, that casual mention of state paperwork, would prove to be her biggest, most catastrophic mistake. A slow smile spread across my face, though inside, I was absolutely seething. Well then, I guess I better call my lawyer. That very afternoon, I met with attorney James Rodriguez, a property law specialist. As I laid out the unbelievable tale, he actually burst out laughing, then quickly apologized for his unprofessionalism. "Seriously, Ethan, this is insane, even by HOA standards. She cannot just take your house. None of this is legal." We immediately pulled up the official HOA bylaws, the ones filed with the county, not Bethany's twisted interpretations. There was no Amendment 17B. The last official amendment, 2 years prior, concerned pool fence heights. James dug deeper, and what he found was chilling. Bethany had indeed filed grant applications with the state, brazenly claiming my property was already a functioning community center. "This is fraud," James declared, his expression turning grim. "Federal fraud, if any of these grants were approved. She's claiming ownership of property that isn't hers, and applying for government money based on false statements." We contacted the state grant office, and discovered Bethany had received preliminary approval for $40,000 in community development funds. The money hadn't been dispersed yet, but the application was a web of lies. She had submitted photos of my house, falsely claiming it was already functioning as a literacy center and senior activity hub. Just 3 days later, everything unraveled spectacularly. Detective Sarah Evans knocked on my door, investigating potential fraud related to state grant applications. I showed her everything, including the damning video of Bethany trying to force her way into ownership of my home. Detective Evans was incredibly thorough. She interviewed the locksmith, who confessed Bethany had told him she was the legal owner conducting an eviction. The 2 board members admitted they had never even seen any Amendment 17B until Bethany showed it to them that morning in the car, thinking they were just there for a routine inspection. The detective also uncovered that this wasn't Bethany's first attempt at creative property acquisition. She'd tried a similar stunt with an elderly neighbor's garden shed, declaring it an eyesore that needed to be demolished and replaced with an HOA storage facility. That case had only been dropped when the neighbor's son, a police officer, got involved. Within a week, Bethany's house of cards collapsed completely. State investigators joined the case, discovering she had applied for grants from multiple agencies, all claiming my property as community-owned. She'd even submitted elaborate architectural plans for renovations she intended to make once she had control. The February HOA meeting was legendary. The rec center was packed with residents who had heard about the investigation. Bethany sat at the head table, desperately trying to maintain her composure, but her usual confidence had completely evaporated. She kept shuffling papers and nervously checking her phone, probably hoping her lawyer would finally return her calls. The board voted to hold an emergency election for president. When Bethany tried to object, citing some made-up rule about mandatory notice periods, resident after resident stood up, sharing their own horrifying stories of her harassment and arbitrary fines. The vote was a landslide, 112-3. The 3 votes for Bethany came from her wine club friends, who looked like they instantly regretted their loyalty. But the true consequences arrived 2 weeks later at the courthouse. Bethany stood before Judge Eleanor Vance, facing charges of attempted fraud, filing false government documents, and conspiracy to commit theft. Her lawyer tried to argue she had simply misunderstood HOA regulations, but the judge wasn't buying it. The evidence was overwhelming, the fake amendment she'd concocted on her home computer, complete with fabricated meeting minutes, the grant applications bearing my forged signature as the supposed community center director, the emails to other board members discussing how to force me out so they could use my workshop space for HOA equipment storage. Bethany tried to speak in her own defense, claiming she was just trying to improve the neighborhood, and that I was a troublemaker who didn't respect authority. The judge cut her off mid-sentence, her voice like steel, pointing out that attempting to steal someone's home was hardly a neighborhood improvement project. The sentence came down like a hammer: 3 years probation, $50,000 in fines, 300 hours of community service, and a permanent ban from serving on any HOA board in the state. She was also ordered to pay my legal fees, which totaled $23,000. Bethany's face cycled through shades of crimson before settling on a ghastly pale gray. She swayed on her feet, gripping the defendant's table for support. "But that's more than my annual salary," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I'll lose my house." The judge's expression remained unmoved. "Perhaps you should have considered that," Judge Vance stated, her gaze unwavering, "before attempting to steal someone else's house, Miss Sterling. Consider yourself fortunate you are not facing jail time."